Dennis Reynolds was last seen on February 4, 1978, in Litchfield, Illinois, during a devastating blizzard that swept through the state. The storm, one of the worst in Illinois' recorded history, brought 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts and wind chills of 60 degrees below zero, leaving airports, businesses, and schools closed and emergency services unable to respond. The National Guard was deployed to assist, but the severe conditions claimed 24 lives inside stranded vehicles and led to the disappearance of 3 men, including Reynolds. That day, Reynolds and his best friend went to a bar as snow began falling in the afternoon. After dropping his friend off, Reynolds said he planned to visit his girlfriend, who was not home at the time. He never returned, and his car was later found abandoned in a snow-filled ditch across from her house, its doors locked and windows broken. Reynolds' jacket was left inside, and it appeared he had tried to reach a nearby home, only 100 feet away, for help. 6 months before his disappearance, Reynolds had been severely beaten with a baseball bat by 2 brothers of a girl he had dated. The brothers allegedly threatened to kill him if he went near their sister again. One brother passed a polygraph regarding Reynolds' case, but the second brother and the girlfriend refused to take one. Though Reynolds drank alcohol and was involved with drugs at the time, his family insists he was close to them and would not have willingly disappeared, particularly given the brutal weather. His case remains unsolved. Rachel Marie Skemp was born on October 13, 1982, to Jeff and Amy Skemp in Melrose Park, Illinois. When Rachel was around 3 years old, her parents divorced, and her mother, Amy, later went on to marry a man named Vince Mellon. Amy and Vince had 2 children together, a son, Jason, born in 1988, and a daughter, Ashley, born in 1990. Rachel was overjoyed to have 2 half-siblings. The family resided at an address on Melissa Drive in Bolingbrook, located approximately 30 miles southwest of Chicago. By 1996, Rachel was a smiley, bright, and funny 7th grader at Ward Middle School, situated in her hometown of Bolingbrook. Rachel excelled at reading and writing. During her babysitting jobs, she would often quiz the children on these subjects. She also had a talent for science and often expressed her intent to one day become a teacher. Rachel was an honor student and followed in her parents' footsteps by becoming a youth leader at the First Baptist Church. Aside from academics, Rachel loved singing and dancing. She was passionate about the environment and recycling. She loved her family and friends and always sought to make them happy. Those who knew her best described Rachel as someone who would light up every room she entered. As Rachel got older, however, things took a dark turn at home. According to a blog post on Medium.com, her mother and stepfather got into a physical altercation in 1990 at the family home. This incident resulted in her mother, Amy, filing a restraining order against Vince for striking her, pushing her down the stairs, and threatening Rachel. The restraining order was eventually dropped, and Amy and Vince rekindled their relationship. In the spring of 1995, Rachel ran away from home for about 12 hours, allegedly after fearing she would be blamed for breaking something her siblings had actually broken. Rachel slept outside one of her friend's houses before going to her step-grandparents, who then took her back home. That summer, Rachel visited her father, Jeff, in Dallas, Texas, for about a month. Before her return to Illinois, Rachel told her uncle that she wanted to stay with Jeff and live in Dallas. The last time Jeff heard from his daughter was on Christmas Day 1995. On January 30th, 1996, the day prior to her disappearance, Rachel was seen crying by her locker at school. This was extremely uncharacteristic of the usually smiley and happy teen. Rachel had told her friends and family she had been feeling unwell for a few days. When concerned friends asked Rachel what was wrong, she simply replied that she had a problem, but insisted she would take care of it herself. The following day, Rachel would disappear under very suspicious circumstances. January 31st, 1996. It was a day of sub-zero temperatures with a dusting of snow on the ground. Rachel stayed home from school after complaining of a sore throat. Her stepfather Vince was also home that day, as he was unemployed. At approximately 10:45 a.m., Rachel called her paternal grandmother to thank her for the Christmas gifts. According to her grandmother Lucy, the conversation seemed normal, though Rachel quietened after a few minutes. Lucy asked if Vince was there, to which Rachel confirmed he was before quickly wrapping up the call, saying she had to go. What happened after this phone call remains unclear. According to Vince, he and Rachel played video games until she went to take a nap early that afternoon, wrapping herself up in a blue blanket. Vince then took the family's white German Shepherd, Duke, for a half-hour walk around 2:30 p.m., leaving the front door unlocked. During this walk, Vince claimed that Duke slipped out of his collar and ran off after rabbits. Sources differ on what happened next. Some say Vince went off to catch Duke before heading home, while others claim he abandoned the dog in the field, believing Duke would find his way home. This detail remains a hard pill for many to swallow. Why would someone abandon a dog, smart or not, in a field on a freezing winter day and expect it to return home by itself? It seemed improbable, and many remained skeptical about Vince's story. An estate agent found the dog wandering later that day and returned Duke to Vince between 4:30 and 5 p.m. Vince, notably, did not make any visible effort to search for his missing stepdaughter. At approximately 3:15 p.m., Rachel's half-sister Ashley, who was 6 at the time, returned home from school to find Rachel missing. Jason returned home a short time later. However, police were not informed of Rachel's disappearance until after 5 p.m., when Amy returned home from work. Police did not immediately prioritize the case, as Rachel had run away once before. They arrived at the house an hour later, and again the following morning. Rachel's room appeared in order, though her pillow and the blue blanket she had been wrapped in were missing. Oddly, Rachel's winter clothes were still at home, along with her Walkman and purse. Given the sub-zero temperatures that day, authorities found it hard to believe that Rachel would leave the house voluntarily. Without proper clothing, she wouldn't have lasted long in such conditions. Authorities began to focus on Vince Mellon after a series of troubling discoveries. Firstly, Vince had visible scratch marks all over his arms, which he claimed were from working on his car. Investigators were skeptical. A more sinister turn came when police found a book titled Daddy Kisses under Rachel's bed, a book about father-child bonds, alongside a steak knife. Police also discovered Rachel's diary. In an entry dated August 7, 1995, Rachel wrote that Vince had kissed her and touched her inappropriately while supposedly warning her about the dangers of predators. These findings painted a deeply disturbing picture. Rachel appeared to be fearful of her stepfather. Given Vince's history of domestic violence, suspicions grew. Vince was extensively questioned, but remained notably uncooperative. He also failed multiple polygraph tests related to Rachel's disappearance. Though polygraphs are inadmissible in court, they fueled further suspicion. Despite mounting evidence and growing suspicions, there was not enough physical evidence to charge Vince with any crime. Investigators searched the Mellon home thoroughly, but found no signs of a struggle or blood. The case was reopened in 2000, at which point authorities obtained samples of Vince's blood, saliva, hair, and semen for a grand jury investigation. However, no charges were filed. The jury's only conclusion was that homicide was likely. Adding an eerie twist, one of the jurors during this investigation was Drew Peterson, a former Bolingbrook police officer who later became infamous for the murder of his third wife and the disappearance of his fourth wife. In the years following Rachel's disappearance, her mother Amy and Vince Mellon moved to Tennessee, cutting ties with Bolingbrook PD. Meanwhile, Rachel's biological father Jeff moved to Illinois to be closer to where his daughter vanished. He kept the same phone number, hoping Rachel might someday call him, but tragically, she never did. Rachel Marie Skemp was 13 years old at the time of her disappearance. She is described as being of Asian descent. Standing at 5 feet tall and weighing between 62 and 80 pounds, she had black hair, hazel eyes, and a mole on the upper left side of her lip. Rachel's hair was cut short at the time, though she commonly wore it shoulder length. In 2002, a memorial tree was planted in Whippler Park across from the Mellon home, with a plaque underneath honoring Rachel's memory. An updated facial reconstruction was released in 2021 by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, showing how Rachel might look at age 38. Bolingbrook police claim they are still actively investigating the case, though no significant leads have emerged. The case remains unsolved. Rachel's loved ones continue to hold on to hope for answers and justice. A $10,000 reward is still being offered for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Rachel's abductor or killer. Shortly after Rachel's disappearance, Jeff Skemp sat in his daughter's empty bedroom. He placed her headphones over his ears and listened to Jag Lil Pill by Alanis Morissette, specifically her favorite song, Hand in My Pocket. Rachel had told Jeff during their final phone call that she was really into Morissette's music, a departure from the pop she loved as a child. To this day, Jeff holds that CD dear, a reminder of his smiley, happy daughter who remains missing. Bradley Olsen was last seen on January 20th, 2007, around 2:25 a.m. at Bar 1, a nightclub located in the vicinity of the 900 block of West Lincoln Highway and in Glidden Road in DeKalb, Illinois. At the time, he was intoxicated, trying to find a way home to Maple Park, Illinois. He had been calling people on his cell phone to arrange a ride, but his phone went dead shortly after his last call. He was never heard from again. Olsen had gone to the nightclub with friends, but stayed until closing time. His friends left earlier in the evening, and by the time he was last seen, he was alone. The night of his disappearance was particularly cold, with temperatures dipping close to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. This added an additional layer of concern to his disappearance, as he was vulnerable to the extreme cold without any apparent means of transportation or help. At the time, Olsen was living with his parents, who were on vacation in Florida. They did not report him missing until January 24th, when they returned home and discovered that he had not been seen or heard from in several days. His vehicles were still at his parents' home, and his bank accounts had not been accessed since his disappearance. Furthermore, he left behind his young daughter, who lived with her mother, adding to the heartbreak and worry surrounding his sudden and unexplained disappearance. Olsen's parents, who had never been out of contact with him for more than 2 days, were immediately concerned. They feared the worst and believed that something had happened to him. His background, which included a criminal history spanning 10 years with various misdemeanor and felony charges, including assaulting a police officer and illegal possession of a firearm, raised questions as to whether his past could be linked to his disappearance. However, investigators have not found any direct connection between his criminal history and his sudden vanishing. The investigation into Olsen's case has been ongoing, with several individuals being given polygraph tests in an attempt to uncover any leads. However, as of now, no suspects have been identified in connection to his disappearance. Despite the passage of time, Olsen's case remains unsolved, and his fate continues to be a mystery. In 2010, after years of investigation with no breakthroughs, Bradley Olsen was declared legally dead. This decision allowed his daughter to collect Social Security benefits, but it did little to ease the pain of his family, who were still left with unanswered questions. Was his disappearance the result of foul play? Did his criminal past have any bearing on what happened to him? Or was something else at play on that fateful night? Olsen's case is an ongoing mystery, and investigators continue to seek answers. The DeKalb Police Department remains the primary investigating agency, and anyone with information about his disappearance is encouraged to come forward. Maria Montana was last seen on July 7, 1990, in Aurora, Illinois. That day, her husband of 12 years, Aurelio Montano, reportedly told Maria to gather her things so he could take her to visit a cousin. She never returned home and was never heard from again. Months passed before anyone reported her missing. Maria's marriage to Aurelio was deeply troubled, marked by repeated allegations of domestic abuse. In 1985, Aurelio had filed for divorce, accusing Maria of extreme and repeated mental cruelty, but the case was ultimately dismissed. The cycle of abuse continued, and in 1990, Maria sought an order of protection against her husband. She told authorities that Aurelio had hit and punched her multiple times and had even threatened her life. In February of that same year, Aurelio was arrested twice for assaulting Maria, further highlighting the violent nature of their relationship. Despite Maria's disappearance, Aurelio filed for divorce again in 1991. In the court documents, he claimed ignorance of Maria's whereabouts, suggesting she might have returned to her native Mexico. When Maria failed to appear at any of the hearings, Aurelio's version of events went uncontested, and questions about her disappearance were left unanswered for years. By the mid-1990s, Aurelio's violent and criminal tendencies escalated. He became involved in drug trafficking and was arrested in Texas on drug-related charges. In 1996, he committed a double murder connected to his drug activities, for which he was sentenced to life in prison. It wasn't until 2007 that Maria's case was reopened, spurred by the persistent efforts of the Montano's daughter, who was just 10 years old when her mother vanished. Investigators began to piece together a horrifying narrative of what might have happened on that fateful day in July 1990. Authorities came to believe that Maria was killed in a domestic violence incident, and her body was buried on a relative's property before being relocated by Aurelio sometime later. One of Aurelio's sisters provided damning testimony. She revealed that Aurelio had asked for her help in burying Maria's body, and that she had seen Maria's remains wrapped in a rug. When police searched the relative's property, they discovered a rug buried underground. Maria and Aurelio's daughter later identified the rug as one from the family home. A cadavered dog brought to the scene confirmed that it carried the scent of human remains, further solidifying suspicions. In 2008, while still incarcerated in an Illinois prison, Aurelio was officially charged with Maria's murder. During his 2013 trial, the chilling details of the case were laid bare. Although Maria's body was never recovered, the testimony, evidence, and Aurelio's history of violence were enough to secure a conviction. Aurelio Montano was found guilty of his wife's murder and sentenced to an additional life term in prison. Maria Montano's story is one of profound tragedy. Born and raised in Zacatecas, Mexico, Maria had moved to the Aurora area as a young teenager, likely hoping for a better future. Instead, her life was marred by abuse and ultimately cut short by the person who was supposed to protect her. Though Aurelio has been held accountable, Maria's body has never been found. For her surviving family, including the daughter who tirelessly fought for justice, Mark Miller was last seen in Rockford, Illinois on March 12, 2009. At the time of his disappearance, Miller was working as a senior banquet captain at the Clock Tower Resort and Conference Center. He left his job that day, but he has never been heard from again. His sudden and unexplained disappearance has baffled investigators, and despite the passing years, the mystery remains unsolved. After Mark's disappearance, his silver 1998 Chrysler New Yorker was found abandoned in the 1900 block of Harlem Boulevard, approximately a mile away from his home, which was located in the 300 block of Whitman Avenue. Authorities believe the car had been parked there sometime during the evening of March 14th or the early morning hours of March 15th, but no signs of a struggle were found either at his vehicle or at his residence. Despite thorough investigations, there was no clear indication of foul play or what may have happened to him. The case took a strange turn in 2012 when a group of ATV riders at the Rocky Glen OHV Park in South Rockford discovered Miller's wallet in an area that is normally submerged underwater. Shortly after this discovery, human remains were found nearby. Initially, investigators thought these remains might belong to Mark Miller, but after further examination, it was confirmed that the body was from someone else entirely. Despite the wallet being found, Miller's briefcase and car keys have never been located, further complicating the investigation and raising questions about his disappearance. On the day he vanished, Miller had told a friend that he planned to ask his roommate of 2 years, Manuel Vasquez Rivera, to move out. Later that day, Mark called his friend back to say that the conversation had gone better than he expected. Rivera was the last known person to have seen Miller, and authorities have expressed interest in locating him for further questioning. However, it is reported that Rivera now lives out of state, and his whereabouts are unknown to investigators. His potential knowledge of Miller's disappearance could provide crucial information in the case, but to this day, no one has been able to determine what, if anything, Rivera might know. Mark Miller was described as a very social individual, known for his work ethic and dedication. He was well-liked by those who knew him, and he had a passion for walking by the river, which adds a poignant layer to the mystery of his disappearance. His vehicle was found near the river, but despite an extensive search of the area, no further signs of him were discovered. The fact that he had a fondness for this area and enjoyed walking there adds an eerie sense to the question of why he would vanish without a trace. Mark Miller was originally from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where his parents still live. His 4 brothers are spread out across 3 different states. Mark graduated from North High School in 1979, and his family has continued to hold out hope that answers will eventually come regarding his disappearance. His case remains one of the many unsolved mysteries in the area of Rockford, and the questions surrounding his vanishing continue to haunt both his family and the community. Despite all efforts to piece together the events surrounding his disappearance, there have been no significant developments in the case. Investigators have not ruled out foul play, but without additional evidence or new leads, it remains unclear what happened to Mark Miller. Zanita and Amala Passenbegovic were 2 sisters who vanished from Hanover Park, Illinois, on July 11, 1995. Their disappearance remains unsolved, and despite the passage of time, their story is still one that haunts their family and the community. The sisters, refugees from the devastating conflict in Bosnia, had fled their war-torn homeland and arrived in the United States just 6 months before they went missing. They settled with their uncle and found work at a factory in nearby Streamwood, Illinois. Although their lives had started to take shape, their stability was short-lived when they were laid off from their jobs. In a desperate bid to make ends meet, they were offered a cleaning job by Paul Frederick Runge, a man who would later be linked to their tragic end. Runge, a man with a long history of violent crimes, was someone who had been on the radar of law enforcement for years. His criminal record stretched back to his teenage years, and his history of brutality would later surface in chilling detail. In 2001, DNA evidence would finally tie him to the murders of Zanita and Amala, as well as several other women. Runge's confession was harrowing, as he claimed responsibility for the deaths of Zanita and Amala, and he admitted to a pattern of violence that spanned many years. He described in graphic detail the horrific events that transpired in his Glendale, Illinois home. According to Runge, the sisters' deaths occurred after they had arrived at his house to work. He claimed that Zanita attempted to flee after an altercation, but he caught her and brutally slammed her head into a concrete slab. After knocking her unconscious, Runge dragged her back inside and placed her in a bathtub filled with water. He left the room for a time, and when he returned, Zanita had drowned. His account of the events was cold and devoid of remorse, a terrifying glimpse into the mind of a man who had no qualms about ending the lives of the women in his care. Amala's fate was equally horrific. Runge recounted how he handcuffed her to a bench in his house, sexually assaulted her, and then strangled her. Afterward, he carried out the grisly task of dismembering their bodies in the bathtub. He placed the pieces into plastic bags and disposed of them in nearby garbage bins, ensuring that any trace of the sisters would be buried forever. Despite Runge's confession and the DNA evidence tying him to the murders, the bodies of Zanita and Amala have never been recovered. The lack of closure for their families is a cruel twist of fate, as they continue to hold out hope for some sort of resolution. Runge's conviction for these brutal murders, along with the murder of an 11-year-old girl and 2 other women, was initially met with the death penalty. However, in 2010, Illinois abolished the death penalty, and Runge's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. This decision marked the end of any possibility for him to face a harsher punishment. In the aftermath of the commutation, the prosecution chose not to pursue further charges related to Zanita and Amela's disappearances. The legal system determined that there was no need for additional charges, as Runge's life sentence ensured that he would never be released. This decision left many questions unanswered and no further investigation into the fates of the sisters. Their families were left in a state of perpetual grief, never fully able to understand what happened to their loved ones. Though Runge's actions and confession sealed his fate, the mystery of Zanita and Amela's final moments remains unsolved in a more literal sense. Without their bodies, their families are left to wonder if there will ever be any further answers. What happened that fateful day in 1995? What could have been done to prevent such a tragedy from occurring? These questions linger unanswered as the years pass, and the memories of the 2 sisters fade further into the shadows of an unsolved case. The disappearance of Zanita and Amela is a chilling reminder of the vulnerability that many people face when trying to rebuild their lives, especially refugees seeking refuge from violence and conflict. Their tragic end highlights the dangers of trusting individuals with dark pasts and underscores the need for vigilance in protecting those who are most at risk. Brinn No was last seen on November 17, 2002, at her home in Capron, Illinois, where she lived with her husband of 2 years, Aaron W. No. According to Aaron, they went to bed around 2 a.m., and when he woke up later that morning, Brinn was gone. Brinn had recently taken a leave of absence from her job at a Loves Park telemarketing firm to get dental work done. But when she failed to return to work as scheduled on November 21st, her mother, Linda Olsen, who worked alongside her, grew concerned. Aaron claimed he thought Brinn was with her mother, but Linda reported her missing that same day. Brinn's marriage to Aaron had been marked by domestic violence. She had sought protective orders against him twice, and he pleaded guilty to domestic battery in January 2002. Though Brinn had once filed for divorce and moved out, Aaron convinced her to reconcile, and she returned home. Despite her tendency to leave after arguments, Brinn always stayed in contact with loved ones, making her sudden disappearance suspicious. Investigators later discovered a large bloodstain matching Brinn's DNA on a mattress in the couple's bedroom, along with blood spatter on the walls and ceiling, and a bloodstained towel in Aaron's vehicle. These findings suggested a violent altercation occurred, leading authorities to believe Brinn had been murdered. In March 2008, Aaron was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. At his trial in December 2010, his defense argued that Brinn had simply walked away from her life, but the prosecution pointed to the blood evidence and her close relationship with her mother, arguing she would never willingly disappear. Aaron was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison, though Brinn's body has never been found. Nancy O'Sullivan was last seen in South Holland, Illinois, on March 7, 1974. She had once lived in the city with her parents and 10 siblings, but had moved to Homewood, Illinois, with her family in 1972. On the day of her disappearance, she visited a family in South Holland, specifically at the 1300 block of 168th Place, right next door to her former home. It was a seemingly ordinary visit, one that would end in an event that has since confounded investigators and left her family in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Nancy was last seen by one of her friends, who stated that she walked to the end of his driveway and then hitched a ride with a blue Cadillac. At the time, Nancy had a history of running away from home. Each time, she would return or be found within a few days. However, this time was different. Nancy never came back. For over 30 years, Her case was classified as a runaway, but as the years passed, it became apparent that something far more sinister might have happened to her. She was never seen again, and her family was left to wonder what truly happened to the young woman who had once been so close to them. One of the most puzzling aspects of Nancy's disappearance was the fact that she left behind her purse and makeup, items she would normally have taken with her. Her loved ones insist that this was completely uncharacteristic of her, making her sudden disappearance even more perplexing. In addition to this, the family she visited on the day she vanished had 2 children who had troubling pasts. One had a drug addiction, and the other was known for a violent reputation. These unsettling connections only added to the mystery surrounding Nancy's disappearance. 2 of the boys who lived in that household have since passed away, and so have their parents. The third boy, who was just a small child at the time of Nancy's disappearance, is unable to provide any helpful information, leaving the case shrouded in silence. The lack of key witnesses or details has only complicated the investigation, and for decades, there seemed to be no significant leads to follow. Initially, law enforcement believed Nancy might have run away again, as she had done in the past. However, after more than 30 years of no contact from her, it became clear that the possibility of her voluntarily staying out of touch with her family was increasingly unlikely. Investigators now suspect that foul play may have been involved, though the case remains unclear due to the lack of concrete evidence. Nancy's disappearance remains a haunting mystery. Few details are available, and the case has remained stagnant over the years. There are theories that she may have traveled to Texas after vanishing, but this has not been confirmed, and no substantial clues have come forward to explain her disappearance. Her family, who once hoped for a happy reunion, now fears the worst, knowing that the passage of time only makes it harder to uncover the truth. Donna Amo was a resident of Crocker, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis, in 1992. In February of that year, she was visiting her uncle in Belleville, Illinois, and had been staying there for a few weeks. Donna was last seen walking along East Monroe Street, near South Illinois Street in Belleville, at approximately 1:30 a.m. on February 18, 1992. She had left her brother's residence with plans to meet her boyfriend, 20-year-old Jeffrey T. Amo, at a nearby fast food restaurant. Donna hoped to have a brief visit with him before her brother drove her back to Missouri. However, she never arrived at the restaurant, and she has not been heard from again since that night. When Donna disappeared, she left behind her personal belongings, including her purse and makeup, which was uncharacteristic of her. Her sudden vanishing raised immediate concerns, and law enforcement quickly began to search for her, but no significant leads emerged in the case. After Donna's disappearance, several individuals came forward claiming to have seen her in the Fenton, Missouri area, but these sightings could not be confirmed or substantiated. This added a layer of uncertainty to the case, as there was no way to verify whether Donna had been seen after she was last reported walking toward the fast food restaurant. One of the main individuals questioned by police was Jeffrey Amo, Donna's boyfriend, who was also the father of her unborn child. Jeffrey was not a blood relative of Donna, but had been close to her, and he was considered an important figure in the investigation. Authorities questioned him about Donna's disappearance, and he underwent a lie detector test, which he passed. Despite this, the investigation into Donna's disappearance continued with no conclusive answers. For months after Donna disappeared, a disturbing discovery was made. Jeffrey Amo's lifeless body was found shot to death by a picnic table in a secluded area of South Side Park near his Belleville home. A note was found near his body, which suggested that he had taken his own life. In addition, the gun used in Jeffrey's death was discovered in a nearby lake, just a few feet away from where his body had been found. His death raised further questions, and investigators were left to wonder if his death had any connection to Donna's disappearance. At the time of his death, there was no clear explanation for why Jeffrey, who had been questioned about Donna's disappearance, would have taken his own life. Some speculated that his death could have been related to his involvement with Donna, but the note found with his body and the presence of the gun in the lake led some to believe that Jeffrey's death may have been a suicide. However, it remains unclear whether there was any connection between his death and Donna's case, and whether either incident was the result of foul play. Donna's case remains unsolved. Stacy Ann Peterson was born on January 20th, 1984, to her parents Anthony and Christy. She grew up in a close-knit family with her sister Cassandra. Stacy Ann Peterson was later born on January 20th as not only a loving and devoted mother to her parents Anthony and Christy, but also someone who she grew up in a close-knit family with her sister Cassandra. Stacy had an incredibly caring nature described Stacy and just wanted the people around her to be happy. Mother to her four children. But despite that light and warmth she brought into the world, always put others before herself. Her story took a dark and troubling turn. Stacy had an incredibly caring nature that would leave her family and just wanted the people around her to be happy. But despite that light and warmth she brought into the world, she began a relationship with a man named Drew Peterson. Drew was born on January 5th, devastated in 1954, which made him about 30 years older than Stacy. She began a relationship with a man named Drew Peterson, and Drew was born on January 5th. But their age difference wasn't which made him about 30 years older than Stacy. Drew was also married at the time when they started seeing each other. Stacy was a teenager. Drew's wife at the time was Kathleen, 46 years old. And their relationship was already wasn't the only complication. Ultimately, Drew was also married when they started seeing 2003, and that same year, wife at the time was Stacy got married. And their relationship was already on rocky ground when she married Drew Ultimately, from the outside, divorced Kathleen in 2003, it might have seemed like that Drew and Stacy had begun a new chapter together. Stacy was just 19 years old, Lacey and Anthony, married Drew Peterson. And Stacy also adopted Drew's two children. It might have seemed like Drew and Stacy had begun Thomas and chapter together. But beneath the surface, two children of their own, things weren't as picture perfect, and Stacy also adopted Drew's before we get into the circumstances surrounding Stacy's Thomas and Christopher. There's an important piece of the story we need to address. Things weren't as picture perfect as they might have appeared. On March 1st, 2004, circumstances just a year after Drew and Stacy got married, there's an important piece of the story we need dead to address. In her bathtub. Kathleen Savio's death. Her death on March 1st, 2004, just a year after Drew and Stacy got married. There were several things about Kathleen Savio was found dead in her bathtub. When Kathleen was found, there wasn't any water in the accidental drowning. Think about that for a moment. There were several things about Kathleen's death in a bathtub that make no water. When Kathleen was found, raise their eyebrows. There wasn't any water in the bathtub. And her death would later become a central part of the investigation and surrounding Stacy's disappearance. In a bathtub with no water. To understand Drew Peterson it's enough to make anyone raise their eyebrows. Past relationships. And her death would later become a central part of the investigation surrounding Stacy's disappearance. Stacy was his fourth wife. To understand Drew Peterson's first marriage, let's look at his first wife was his high school sweetheart, Stacy wasn't the first woman they got married in 1974. In fact, and had two sons together. His fourth wife, Stephen and first Eric. Marriage. But the marriage ended in 1980 his high school sweetheart, Drew had an affair. They got married in 1974. 2 years later, and had 1982 together. Drew married Victoria Vicky Connolly. But the marriage ended in 1980. They were together for 10 years. After during that had time, an affair. They had a daughter. Second marriage. Vicky later claimed that Drew was both in 1982 and controlling. Drew married Victoria Vicky Connolly. She even alleged that they were together for 10 years, and during that time, make it look like an accident. Had a daughter. Third Vicky marriage. Later claimed that after Drew was both abusive and Drew married Kathleen Savio in 1992. She even alleged that Drew their marriage was volatile. To and say make the it least, look like an accident. Between 2002 and 2004, after divorcing Vicky, police were called to Drew and Kathleen's home in 1992. A shocking 18 times. Their marriage domestic disturbances, to say the least. The pattern of abuse between 2002 and 2004, each of his marriages. Police were called to Drew and Kathleen's home even more significant 18 as we continue to domestic Stacy's disappearance. The pattern of abuse and control seemed to follow the day Stacy Peterson disappeared. And this pattern becomes even more significant as we continue to explore Stacy's disappearance. And the last time anyone heard from Stacy was around let's talk about the day Stacy Peterson she had spoken to her family over the phone. It was Sunday and told October 28th she was heading to a friend's house to help paint. And the last time anyone heard from Stacy was around never 10 a.m. that morning. Stacy's family began to family over the phone when they couldn't reach her and told them for the rest she was heading to a friend's house the next day. But according to this friend, 2007.
Stacy never showed up.
Stacy was Stacy's family began to grow concerned.
But here's where things take another
strange
turn.
The rest of the day. Drew Peterson had his own explanation for Stacy's disappearance. 2007. According to Stacy,
Drew,
was officially
he claimed that on the
night of October 28th. But here's where things take another strange turn. Called him and
Drew
told
Peterson
him that she had his own explanation for Stacy's
Drew
disappearance.
said Stacy told him
according
she
to
had parked
Drew,
her car at the
he claimed that on the night of
October
28th and was running off to start a new life.
called him,
but
told him that
Stacy's
she was
family
leaving him
wasn't
for
buying
another
it.
man.
They knew
Drew
Stacy would never leave her children
parked
behind.
her car at the Bolingbrook
Stacy
International
adored her
Airport
kids and was running off to start a new life. And her family knew that she
family
wouldn't just
wasn't
vanish
buying
without
it.
a trace. They knew Stacy's
Stacy's
family and
her
friends
children behind.
also revealed that
Stacy
Stacy
had
adored her
been afraid
kids.
of Drew.
She had
All
told
four
them
of
she
them.
wanted to leave him,
And her family
but she
knew
was
that she wouldn't
terrified
just
of what he
vanish
might
without
do.
a trace.
Stacy's
told her
family
loved
and
ones
friends
that she believed
also
Drew would
revealed
kill
that
her
Stacy had
and
been
make it
afraid
look
of
like an
Drew.
accident.
She had told them she wanted to
echo of
leave
what
him,
Drew's second wife,
but she was
Vicky,
terrified
had
of
said
what he
he
might
years
do.
earlier.
Stacy
Drew was
even
told
told
her
her
loved
extremely
ones that she
controlling.
believed Drew would kill
For
her
example,
and
if
make it
Stacy
look like an
went to the
accident.
grocery store,
A chilling
Drew would
echo of
demand
what
to see the
Drew's second
receipt
wife, Vicky,
and check the
had
timestamp
said
to make
years
sure
earlier.
Stacy wasn't up to
Drew
something
was also
or
extremely
meeting someone
controlling.
else. For example,
Stacy
if
confided
Stacy
in her
went to the
pastor,
grocery
Neil
store,
Scorey,
Drew would
during
demand
this
to see
time
the
as
receipt
well,
and check
during
the
one
timestamp
meeting,
to make sure Stacy
Pastor
wasn't up to
Scorey
something
recalled that Stacy
or
looked
meeting
at him
someone else
and said something that sent
Stacy
chills down his
confided in
spine.
her
He
pastor,
did it.
Neil Scorey.
When Neil asked her
during
what
this
she
time
meant,
as well,
Stacy said,
during one meeting,
he killed Kathleen.
Pastor Scorey recalled that
single
Stacy
sentence
looked
would
later
later
raise
and said
serious
something that
questions,
sent chills down
not
his
just
spine.
about
He did
Stacy's
it.
disappearance.
When Neil asked
but
her what
also
she meant,
about Kathleen
Stacy
Savio's
said,
mysterious
he killed
death.
Kathleen.
After Stacy
That
was
single
reported
sentence
missing,
would later raise serious
authorities
questions.
immediately began their
Not
investigation,
just about Stacy's
given
disappearance,
Drew Peterson's troubling
but also
history
about
and
Kathleen
Stacy's earlier
Savio's
confessions to
mysterious
friends
death.
and family. After
He
Stacy
quickly
was
became the
reported
prime
missing,
suspect.
authorities
One of the most
immediately
critical
began their
developments in this
investigation,
case
given
came
Drew
from
Peterson's
Stacy's
troubling
past
history
behavior
and Stacy's
fears.
earlier confessions to
As
friends
I
and
mentioned
family.
earlier,
She
she
had
quickly
confided
became
in
the
her
prime
pastor,
suspect,
Neil Scorey,
one of the most
that
critical
she believed
developments
Drew
in
had
this
killed
case
Kathleen Savio,
came from Stacy's
his
past
previous
behavior
wife,
and fears.
This raised an
As I
urgent
mentioned
question.
earlier, if
She
Drew
had
had been
confided in
capable
her
of killing
pastor,
Kathleen,
Neil Scorey,
could he have also harmed
that she
Stacy?
believed Drew had killed
The
Kathleen
authorities
Savio,
decided to take a
his
closer
previous
look
wife.
at Kathleen
This
Savio's
raised
death.
an urgent question.
Initially ruled an
If
accidental
Drew had been
drowning
capable of
in
killing
2004,
Kathleen,
could he have also harmed
Kathleen's
Stacy?
death had always
The
seemed
authorities
suspicious
decided
to
to take a
those close to her.
closer look.
Her
at
bathtub
Kathleen
had no
Savio's
water
death.
when her body was discovered.
Initially ruled an
And she had
accidental
visible
drowning
bruises
in 2004,
and cuts that suggested
Kathleen's
something
death
more
had
sinister
always
had
seemed
occurred.
suspicious to those
In
close to her.
2007,
Her bathtub
as
had
part of the
no water when her
investigation
body
into
was
Stacy's
discovered.
disappearance,
and she had visible
Kathleen's
bruises
body was
and
exhumed
cuts
for a
that
second
suggested
autopsy.
something more
This
sinister had
time,
occurred.
the
In
results were very
2007,
different.
as
The
a part of
second
the
examination
investigation
determined
Stacy's
that Kathleen
disappearance
death was not
Kathleen's
accidental.
body was exhumed
Instead,
for a second
it was
autopsy.
officially ruled a
This
homicide.
time,
While
the results
authorities
were
were
very
working
different.
tirelessly
The
to
second
uncover what happened
examination
to
determined
Stacy,
that Kathleen's
Drew's
death
behavior
was not
raised more
accidental.
red flags.
Instead,
For one,
it was officially
he didn't
ruled
seem
a
to display the
homicide.
kind of concern
While
or
authorities
desperation
were
you'd
working
expect from
tirelessly
someone
to
whose
uncover
wife
what had happened to
had just
Stacy,
gone missing.
Drew's
In
behavior
fact,
raised more
his
red
demeanor was
flags.
described as
For
cold,
one,
dismissive.
he didn't seem to
and
display
even
the kind of
joking.
concern
He
or
appeared on
desperation
multiple
you'd
television
expect from
interviews,
someone whose
and
wife
often
had
came
just gone
across as
missing.
smug or
In
indifferent.
fact,
His
making
demeanor was
inappropriate
described as
comments
cold,
about Stacy's
dismissive,
disappearance,
and even joking.
At one point,
He appeared on
Drew
multiple
even
television
referred to
interviews
Stacy as a
and
runaway
often
mom,
came across
and
as
insisted
smug
she had
or
abandoned
indifferent,
him and their
making
children to be with
inappropriate
another
comments
man.
about
He
Stacy's
stuck to a
disappearance.
story that Stacy
At
had
one
called him on
point,
the night of her disappearance.
Drew even referred to Stacy
claiming
as a
she was
runaway
leaving
mom,
for good,
and insisted she had
Stacy's
abandoned
family
him
wasn't
and their
buying
children
it.
to be with
They
another
continued
man.
to speak out.
He stuck to a
saying
story
there was
that
no way
Stacy had
Stacy
called him
would
on the
have left
night
her
of her
children
disappearance.
behind.
Her sister
Claiming she was
Cassandra and
leaving
her
for
father,
good.
Anthony.
But Stacy's
worked
family
tirelessly
wasn't
to keep
buying it.
Stacy's story
They
alive
continued to speak
and to
out,
push for answers,
saying there was no
the
way
investigation
Stacy would have
into
left her
Stacy's
children
disappearance
behind.
revealed
Her
several
sister
critical
Cassandra
pieces
and
of
her
information
father,
Anthony,
that painted a clearer
worked
picture
tirelessly to
of
keep
what might
Stacy's
have
story
happened
alive
and
the
to push for
timeline of
answers.
events.
The
Stacy
investigation
was last heard
Stacy's
from around 10 a.m.
revealed
on
several
October
critical
28,
pieces of information
2007.
that painted a clearer
Drew
picture
later claimed she had
of what
left him
might
that
have
same
happened.
night. The
But her
timeline of
family
events.
never heard from her again.
Stacy was last heard
The
from
car.
around 10 a.m.
Authorities
on
found
October 28,
Stacy's car parked at close
2007 International Airport. Drew later claimed she had left him that same night. The car was unlocked. Her family never heard from her again. Keys were missing. The discovery of the
found
car
Stacy's car
staged
parked at
as
Cloud
if someone
International
wanted to
Airport
reinforce
in
Drew's
Bolingbrook,
story that
Illinois.
Stacy had run away.
The car was unlocked.
Drew's
and
alibi,
her purse and keys
Drew
were
claimed
missing.
that on the morning of
The discovery
October
of the car
28th,
seemed staged.
he was at home with the
as if
children.
someone wanted to
However,
reinforce Drew's story.
neighbors
that
later
Stacy
reported
had
seeing
run away.
Drew moving a large
Drew's
blue barrel
alibi
from the house
Drew
into his
claimed that
SUV.
on the morning of October
This detail
28th,
became one of
he
the
was
most
at
chilling
home with
and
the children.
damning pieces of
However,
evidence in the case.
Neighbors later
blue
reported
barrel.
seeing Drew moving
The
a
mention
large
of the blue barrel
from
came
the
from
house
one of Drew's
into
close
his
friends,
SUV.
Steve
This
Carcerano.
detail became one of the most
Steve
chilling
later
and
testified
damning
that
pieces
Drew
of
had
evidence
asked for his
in the
help to
case.
move a heavy
The blue
barrel
barrel
out of his home. The
According
mention
to
of the
Steve,
blue barrel came from
the
one of
barrel
Drew's
was
close
warm to
friends,
the touch,
Steve Carcerano,
suggesting that whatever was
Steve
inside
later
had been
testified
recently
that
placed
Drew
there.
had asked for his help
The
to
blue
move
barrel
a heavy
has never
barrel
been
out of his
found.
home. But
According to
investigators
Steve,
believe it could have been
the
used
barrel
to
was
transport
warm to the
Stacy's
touch,
body,
as
suggesting that whatever was
investigators dug
inside had
deeper
been
into
recently
Drew
placed
Peterson's
there.
past.
The blue
They
barrel
were
has
finally
never
able to
been
make a
found,
breakthrough,
but
in
investigators
Kathleen's
believe
Savio's
it could have been
case.
used to
In
transport Stacy's
2009,
body.
5
As
years after
investigators
Kathleen's
dug
death,
deeper into Drew
Drew
Peterson's
Peterson was
past,
arrested.
they were
and
finally
charged
able
with
to make a
murder.
breakthrough.
The prosecution
Kathleen's
argued that
Savio's
Drew
case.
had killed Kathleen
In
to prevent her
2009,
from receiving
5
a
years
significant
after
portion
Kathleen's
of his police
death,
pension. In
Drew
their divorce
Peterson was
settlement.
arrested.
They
and
also
charged
presented
with her
testimony
murder.
from
The
Stacy's
prosecution
loved ones,
argued that Drew
who
had
said
killed
Stacy had
Kathleen
told
to
them
prevent
Drew
her
from
from
receiving a
killing
significant
Kathleen.
portion of his
In
police
2012,
pension. In their divorce
Drew
settlement,
Peterson was
they
found
also
guilty
presented
of Kathleen
testimony from
Savio's murder
Stacy's loved one
and was sentenced to
who
38
said
years
Stacy
in
had
prison.
told them Drew had
This
confessed to
conviction
killing
was a
Kathleen.
small measure of justice
In
for Kathleen's
2012,
family.
Drew
But
Peterson was
Stacy's
found
loved
guilty of
ones were
Kathleen
still left
Savio's
without
murder
answers
and was sentenced
Despite
to 38
years of
years in
searching,
prison.
Stacy
This
Peterson's
conviction
body
was a small
has
measure
never
of
been
justice for
found.
Kathleen's
Her
family.
family remained
But
steadfast
Stacy's
in their
loved
belief
ones
that
were
Drew
still
was
left without
responsible for her
answers.
disappearance.
Despite
In
years
2017,
of searching,
Stacey
Drew was
Peterson's
recorded
body
in prison
has
allegedly
never been
admitting
found.
to Stacy's
Her
murder.
family remained
During a
steadfast
conversation
in
with
their
another
belief
inmate,
that Drew was responsible
Drew
for her
reportedly said he had
disappearance.
killed Stacy
In
and disposed of her
2017,
body to ensure
Drew was
no one
recorded
would
in
ever
prison
find her.
allegedly admitting
While this
to
statement
Stacy's
has not
murder.
led to additional
During a
charges,
conversation with another
it has
inmate,
only reinforced
Drew
what
reportedly
Stacy's
said he
family
had killed Stacy
and the public
disposed
already
of her
believed.
body to ensure
Drew
no one would
Peterson
ever find
remains
her.
in prison for
While
Kathleen
this statement has not
Savio's
led to
murder.
additional charges,
In addition to his
it has
38-year
only
sentence,
reinforced what Stacy's
Drew was
family
later convicted in
and the public already
2016
believed.
of soliciting the murder
Drew
of
Peterson
James
remains
Glasgow,
in prison for
the
Kathleen
prosecutor who
Savio's
had worked
murder.
to convict him.
In addition
For
to
this
his 38-year
he
sentence,
received an additional
Drew was
40
later
years in
convicted in
prison.
2016
Meanwhile,
of soliciting the murder
Stacy's
of James
family
Glasgow.
continues to fight for
The
justice.
prosecutor who had worked
Her
to
sister,
convict him
Cassandra,
for this
has been one of the most
he
vocal
received an
advocates
additional
for Stacy,
40 years in
never
prison.
giving up hope that
Meanwhile,
one day they'll find
Stacy's
answers
family
and bring her
continues
home.
to fight for justice. Her sister, Cassandra, has been one of the most vocal advocates for Stacy, never giving up hope that one day they'll find answers and bring her home.